So here's a question. How does this small, kind of defeated group of people, all huddled together in one city, suddenly become this global phenomenon? Well, that's what we're going to dive into. We're going to chart the absolutely explosive growth of this movement, all based on its earliest chronicle, the Book of Acts.
And really, this is the big question, right? Their leader, this incredibly charismatic figure, Jesus, is gone. I mean, the story should be over. So, what happens now? How in the world do you keep something like that going when it feels like all the odds are stacked against you?
Well, just before he leaves, their founder gives them this massive, final instruction. And it's not a suggestion, it's a full-on mission statement. Just look at the scale of this thing. Start here, in Jerusalem, then expand to the whole region. And after that, go global, to the uttermost part of the earth. Can you imagine, for this tiny, grieving group, that must have sounded just impossibly ambitious.
All right, so our story kicks off right where he left them. Picture this, an upper room somewhere in Jerusalem. There are about 120 of his followers all gathered together. And they're not out there preaching or protesting. Nope, they're just waiting, doing exactly what they were told to do.
And then, on the day of Pentecost, something just completely out of the ordinary happens. The story describes this sound like a rushing mighty wind that just fills the whole house. The followers are suddenly filled with what the text calls the Holy Spirit. And get this, they start speaking in languages they have never, ever learned before. This isn't just some weird noise. It's the spark. It's the catalyst for everything that comes next.
Now, what's so cool here is the timing. Pentecost was a huge Jewish festival, which means Jerusalem was absolutely packed with international visitors. We're talking people from all over the known world, Parthians, Medes, folks from Egypt, Libya, even Rome, and they are completely stunned. Why? Because they're hearing these followers, who they see as simple, uneducated people from Galilee, speaking about the works of God, but in their own native languages. It's just mind-blowing for them.
So, in the middle of all this commotion, the Apostle Peter stands up. He gives the movement's very first public speech, and he connects everything that's happening to ancient prophecies they all would have known. The response? It's immediate. It's overwhelming. On that one day, 3,000 people join them. Just think about that. They went from 120 people in a room to over 3,000. The movement just exploded onto the public stage.
Okay, so you've just had this massive influx of people. What does this new community even look like? How are they going to function? And what kind of challenges are they facing right out of the gate?
Well, their defining feature was this idea called koinonia, which we translate as fellowship. But this was so much more than just hanging out together. You got to remember, in a Roman world built on really strict social classes, what they did was, well, it was radical. They basically created this communal economy. People were selling their property, their houses, and all the money was pooled and distributed so that, as the text puts it, no one in the community was in need. I mean, this was a massive experiment in social and economic unity that just turned the norms of their society completely upside down.
But, it wasn't some perfect utopia. And this is where the story gets really real. The first big tests come from two totally different directions. From the inside, you get deception. A couple, Ananias and Sapphira, they lie about how much money they're donating and face these dire consequences. It introduces this really sobering element of discipline. And then from the outside, the authorities are getting nervous about their growing influence, so they start arresting the apostles. So right away, this new little movement is being squeezed from both the inside and the outside.
Now, normally you'd think that kind of pressure, especially from the authorities, would just crush a new movement like this. But this is where the story takes this incredible paradoxical twist. The very thing that was meant to destroy them actually becomes the engine for their growth.
The pressure ramps up to lethal force. A really dynamic believer named Stephen is accused of blasphemy, and he's executed. He becomes the movement's very first martyr. And the text makes a point to mention this one crucial detail. The people who are stoning him lay their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul, who completely approves of the execution. You're going to want to remember that name, Saul.
So Stephen's death unleashes what the text calls a great persecution against the community in Jerusalem. And what happens? Well, all the believers except for the apostles are forced to flee the city. But here's the thing. They don't just go into hiding. No way. They scatter everywhere. And as they go, they preach the message. They take it into all the surrounding regions, Judea and Samaria. They're actually fulfilling the next phase of that original mission, not in spite of the persecution, but because of it.
And that whole wave of persecution,
It brings us right back to that young man we just mentioned, Saul, the one who approved of Stephen's death. And this might just be the most dramatic twist in the entire story.
See, Saul isn't just some guy in the background. He's an active, passionate enemy of this new movement. The account says he was trying to destroy the church, going from house to house, literally dragging men and women off to prison. You could say he was their #1 threat.
So he's on the road to Damascus, actually on his way to arrest more believers, when bam, he's hit by this blinding light from the sky. He falls to the ground and hears a voice, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And when he asks who's speaking, the voice says, "I am Jesus, the one you're persecuting." I mean, talk about the ultimate confrontation.
And in that single moment, everything flips. The man who was the church's biggest threat becomes its greatest champion. Saul, who you also know by his other name, Paul, goes from persecutor to preacher almost overnight. He ends up becoming the most influential missionary and theologian in the entire history of the movement. It's an unbelievable turnaround.
Paul's conversion is so dramatic that it forces this huge culture-shattering question right out into the open. See, up to this point, the movement has pretty much been seen as a sect within Judaism. But now, they can't avoid the question anymore. Is this message just for us, for a select group, or is it for everyone? And the answer to that question unfolds in this really cool sequence of events, all centered around Peter. First, he has this wild vision that just completely challenges his whole idea of what's clean and unclean. Right after that, he gets a summons to the house of a Roman soldier, a non-Jew, a Gentile named Cornelius. And Peter does something radical. He actually goes inside his home, which was a huge no-no for a devout Jew back then. And as he's talking to them, the Holy Spirit reportedly falls on all the Gentiles in the room, just like it did on the Jews back at Pentecost. For Peter, this was undeniable proof.
This event is a total game changer. It's a seismic shift. Because when the leaders back in Jerusalem hear about this and agree that non-Jews don't have to become Jewish to join the faith, well, the entire identity of the movement transforms. It just breaks out of its original cultural container. Suddenly, it's not about ethnicity or where you're from anymore. It's about belief. And that makes it a message that could potentially reach anyone, anywhere in the world. So with those ideological barriers now smashed, the final part of the book tracks the relentless, non-stop geographical spread of the message, and who's leading the charge? None other than the converted persecutor himself, Paul.
Paul's journeys are just incredible. They take him all across the Roman Empire. I mean, just listen to this highlight reel. In Cyprus, he's confronting a sorcerer. In Lystra, the crowd first tries to worship him as a god, and then they turn on him and stone him, leaving him for dead. In Philippi, he establishes the very first community in Europe from a prison cell. In Athens, he's standing on Mars Hill debating Greek philosophers, trying to find common ground by quoting their own poets. And in Ephesus, his preaching is so disruptive to the local economy, which was all about making idols for the goddess Diana, that it sparks a citywide riot. It is just this relentless and often really dangerous push into totally new cultures.
And this is how the book ends. It's so striking. Paul finally makes it to Rome, the very heart of the empire. But he gets there as a prisoner, under house arrest. And yet, even chained up, the story closes with him freely preaching his message with all confidence, with literally no one stopping him, totally unhindered.
And that's it. That's where the author leaves us. There's no happily ever after, no tidy ending. The story just stops. The mission is still going. And it leaves you with this final, really powerful question. What is it about some ideas that lets them survive their founders, actually thrive under persecution, smash through cultural barriers, and in the end, change the world? And maybe more importantly, what can this ancient story show us about the power of ideas today?